Football Manager as a game has existed since 2005, and since 2005, there have only been a few players to ever earn the distinction of a -10 potential. That technically means their potential ability ranges from 170 to 200. What it actually means is it's the highest potential ability in the game. No player has ever been rated a perfect 200, including Lionel Messi at his prime. But each of these players had such high potential, they could be that. And we started Football Manager 2005 with you already know who's coming. It's Freddie Adu. That's right, the original Football Manager Wonderkid, Freddie Adu. Born in Ghana, he moved to the US at the age of 8, where he was basically instantly found by local soccer coaches. It's soccer, we're in the US. And by the time he was 14, he'd signed the youngest professional contract in the history of American sports. The only issue is after a big transfer to Real Salt Lake, he moved over to Europe at the age of 18. And it just never worked out for him. And then things started getting weird. He went to Portugal, he went to Greece, he went to Turkey before finally landing back in the US in 2011, where he played 2 solid seasons with Philadelphia Union. But at this point, the now 24-year-old Freddie Adu had quite clearly not lived up to his potential. And by 2018, his days of playing football at a top level were done. To be fair to him, he did clock 11 appearances for the US national team, so it's hard to call him a complete failure. He did make his career last quite a while. And also, to be fair to him, he is not near the only flop on this list. And I've been trying to make this video for a while. I've been scouring for different ways to potentially do it until I discovered that somebody already had. This list comes from a user named Ekut00 in the Football Manager subreddit, who did the dirty legwork owning all of these games, and not only that, scouring them for the highest potential players using the search function. And you'll notice something looking at this list. It is incredibly top heavy. It is clear that there was a philosophy shift from 2009 to 2011 that drastically shifted the potential ability ratings to players. What exactly caused that, I don't know. One person in the comments below the post speculates it's because Ronaldo and Messi basically expanded the level that players were able to reach, and honestly, I kind of buy that. But that also at least likely combined with a shift in Sports Interactive's rating mentality. But most importantly, it gives us a lot of dudes from 2005 to 2010 that had potential best ever potential. And next up on the list is a classic, Hatem Ben Arfa. The French attacking player was one of the hottest commodities, really for one reason. He was capable of show-stopping performances on the field. And that did translate to his career, where he was able to produce multiple, unbelievably memorable goals. He was looked on with a sort of curiosity, the type that goes after a player you feel like has all the talent in the world, but maybe doesn't work as hard as he could to get the most out of it. He stuck around the top level of the game until 2022, when he finally played his last match at Lille, notching 15 French national team appearances, but never really considered a regular. But he still did way better than a lot of the guys on this list, including our next competitor, Rudy Carlier. He takes the honor for being the man with the shortest Wikipedia page on this entire list. At the time it came out, he was an 18-year-old breaking into the Strasbourg first team. The problem is he was just never really able to make it stick. By 2007, he was getting loaned out to all sorts of different places, and by 2009, just 5 years after this game's database was locked in 2004, he was out of first division football in Europe, playing in the second division of Spain. And he never really recovered his footing. By 2015, he was done. Next was Nigerian Issa Eliakwu. At the time, he was coming up at Inter, but he hadn't made a first team appearance yet, and he never would. He stuck at a club called Triestina for a couple of years, making 40 appearances over 2 seasons with a loan out to Spezia in between. Then after that, he became a journeyman. He jumped to Russia, he bounced around to Turkey, and the last anyone heard of him was at Al Jabalain in 2018. That's a Saudi club before it was cool. It's safe to say Issa Eliakwu, despite his incredibly high rating, never really got off the ground. But you know who did? Cesc Fabregas. That's right, in 2005, or on FM 2005, he was given the highest possible potential ability. And considering the last couple of guys we saw, they nailed this one. He ended up making 110 appearances for Spain and had long spells with Arsenal and Chelsea that cemented a star-studded career. And the same can be said for the next name from 2005, Vincent Kompany. That's right, Football Manager 2005 is heating up, baby. Swish. At the time, he was plying his trade at Anderlecht. He'd already been in the first team for a couple of seasons, and a quick move to Hamburg before bouncing, of course, to Manchester City, where he captained the rise of one of the great new powers of the world of football, while also leading Belgium with 89 appearances and being a part of that Belgium golden generation. And not that the Football Manager rating had anything to do with this, but he is also doing a pretty darn good job coaching Bayern Munich. FM's hot streak continued by giving that top potential ability to Ricardo Montalivo as well. While he might not be as memorable for people in England, Ricardo Montalivo had a brilliant career. At the time the game came out, he was at Atalanta, but he moved to Fiorentina and then on to AC Milan and made a ton of appearances for both, finally calling it a career after the 2019 season. I don't care what anybody says, that's a hit. And the hits keep coming. Samir Nasri was the next name on the list. Newly minted at 17 years old at the time the database came out, he was just breaking through with Marseille. He would go on to join Arsenal and then Manchester City before his career started to fade in 2016. But for that decade, Samir Nasri was genuinely considered a top-level attacking player. He made 41 appearances for France and of course was a part of Manchester City's inaugural Premier League title. But how about the next name from Football Manager 2005? Memo Ochoa. He's still playing! He was at Club America in Mexico and had already kind of broken into the first team when the ratings were being put together for the game. But on the club side, Memo Ochoa's never really found a top-level home in Europe. He played with Ajaccio in France, he bounced around Spain for a little bit, he then went to Belgium with Standard Liège for a couple of seasons as their primary goalkeeper, then back to Club America, then back over to Europe with Salernitana. But it's with the national team that Memo Ochoa has become an unforgettable person. 151 appearances, and basically the spirit animal of the World Cup at this point. Well, nobody ever thought Memo Ochoa was the best goalkeeper in the world. He sometimes is, just for the national team randomly. But it's about time Football Manager missed again, and that's Horacio Peralta. This guy was given potential Messi ability. That happened while he was on an explosive 2-year run with Club Nacional de Futbol in Uruguay. And at the time the ratings came out, he was 22 years old. That's because these potential abilities are assigned to players under the age of 23. That has fluctuated more as Football Manager's gone on, but he's obviously one of the older guys on this list. The problem is after they gave him that potential ability, he was kind of right when he moved to Europe to play for Cagliari. But that didn't work out. He made one appearance and then became a one-season wonder basically everywhere he played, eventually calling it a career in 2017. What's remarkable is that when he received the rating, he had 7 appearances for the Uruguay national team. He would make no more after receiving the rating. His career really fell apart. However, his managerial career is solid. He's now coaching this team, Miramar Misiones, who are in the top flight of Uruguay. Then there was Jose Antonio Reyes, who was a regular in the Sevilla first team by the time he was added to this. And although this might be before your time, it's certainly before mine. He became a regular at Arsenal for a couple of seasons before they loaned him to Real Madrid, then promptly sold him to Atletico Madrid for 5 seasons. He then spent the twilight years of his career playing 4 seasons at Sevilla. From 2000 to 2016, Jose Antonio Reyes was playing at a very high level in the top flights of Europe. He made a rapid-fire 21 appearances for Spain. That ended in 2006, though. So he's right on the fence of actually getting near the unbelievable potential he was given. Only 2 left in FM25, and one of them is Benedict Vilakazi. Now, Benedict Vilakazi's from South Africa, and he was also 21, 22 years old when this database was being put together. But he was already playing a ton of games for Orlando Pirates. In fact, in his career, he would go on to make 170 appearances. If you don't know anything about South African ball, they are one of the best teams. After 2007, he tried the jump to Europe. He went to Aalborg, but it didn't work out. He came back to South Africa the next year, and that was kind of it. He made 31 appearances for the national team, but obviously if you don't get out of the South African League, you're not really reaching the potential here. And then one of the most fascinating, Ahmed Yahyaoui. He was 17 when this came out and just getting into the team at Marseille, but he really never got into the team anywhere. After that 1 year at Marseille where he made 5 appearances, he moved to Istres, and then after another year moved to Sion, who then released him. He quite simply never found a foothold after that, or really another opportunity. This guy was teammates with Samir Nasri and given the same potential ability and basically vanished after 2007. I mean, was playing like regional league type football in France after that. But that takes us to 2006, where we already have some repeat offenders. Freddie Adu is once again there, and so is Hatem Ben Arfa. There's also Cesc Fabregas and Vincent Kompany that made the list for a second time on Football Manager 2006. But there are, of course, some new names, among them Curlin, a Brazilian who was just breaking through at Cruzeiro at the time that the database was made. A couple of years later, in 2008, Inter actually signed him. He did a couple of loans with Chievo Verona and Ajax, but it became pretty clear that he just wasn't up to the level. And by 2012, he'd ended up in the Japanese league. And after a couple of years there, he bounced around the US a bit, and that was kind of it, until he tried to make a European comeback with Spartak Trnava, but that didn't really work out in 2016. Then there was some guy named Lionel Messi. Who knows what happened to him, honestly. Then there was also Memo Ochoa and Jose Antonio Reyes, but there were a couple other new guys. There was Lucas Podolski. I remember him when I first started watching the German national team. He was one of the feature guys. When the database came out, he was already a regular player at Cologne, and he bounced around the top level of the game for a while. Bayern Munich, Arsenal, and then he kept a really modern vibe towards the end of his career with a stint in Turkey at Galatasaray, a little jaunt over to Japan for a year or two. Did you know that he's still playing? He's extended his contract through the end of this season with Górnik Zabrze in the top league of Poland. I know I nailed that pronunciation. He made 130 appearances for Germany, though, so they did kind of nail this. And they nailed the next one, Sergio Ramos. Duh, dude had nearly 500 appearances for Real Madrid and nearly 200 appearances for the Spanish national team. Was also kind of a key player in the greatest international run of dominance in the modern era. But at the time the database came out, he had just moved to Real Madrid. So, partial credit? He's still playing. He's in Mexico, by the way, with Monterrey. But that's it for 2006. Football Manager 2007 had the most top potential Wonderkids in any game ever. And there are a lot of bangers in here, starting with Sergio Aguero. Aguero had just made the move to Atletico Madrid for the season that this game was coming out for. He would go on to make 175 appearances for them, 275 league appearances for Man City after that, becoming one of the greatest Premier League strikers of all time, and managed 101 Argentina appearances even though his career was cut short due to a medical issue. He is one of the iconic players of the 2010s, so yeah, they nailed this. Aguero was joined on the list by a South American compatriot, Anderson. That's a name you haven't heard in a while. The Brazilian had just moved to Porto at the start of the database, and after 1 year there, he joined Manchester United for 8 seasons. This dude, while not being a huge part of Manchester United over that time, did win 4 Premier League titles. He was there. He was in the squad. After that long stint, he headed over to Inter for a couple of seasons and then bounced to Turkey for a little bit before calling it a career. He made 8 appearances for Brazil in the first year he was on Manchester United, but instead of leading the charge in creating the history like Football Manager thought he might do, he kind of just had a front row seat to it. Then, shout out to my boy Hatem Ben Arfa, who made the list for a 3rd straight year, as well as Cesc Fabregas. So those guys enter just a realm of their own, being this level of Wonderkid for 3 straight seasons. They are joined in that respect by Memo Ochoa, who's also now made it for 3 straight years. There's also Curlin. Again, he made the list again. Then there was also Lucas Podolski. He made it for a 2nd straight year in 2007, but now the rest of the new guys. How about Giovanni Dos Santos? The Mexican player was coming out of the Barcelona Academy when this database dropped. In the following year, he joined the Barcelona first team, his only season with them, making 28 appearances. He then moved to Tottenham and just ended up on a loan journey to try and find his form before heading back to Spain and playing for lower level top flight teams like Mallorca and Villarreal, who at the time weren't quite what they are now. He then moved to CONCACAF, playing with LA Galaxy for a couple of years and then going to the Mexican League. But his real importance was with the Mexican national team, where he was going to World Cups and making over 100 appearances over the course of a career with the national team that lasted over a decade. It's fascinating how you run into players like that their club life never quite works out, but they stay very important and very high level for a good national team. But how about the next one? Radamel Falcao. And you forget just how good this guy got. forgot. He at one point in 2012 was 5th in the Ballon d'Or voting. At the time the database came out, he was in the middle of a tear at River Plate in his early 20s. Then he moved to Porto and then to Atletico Madrid, where he had the high water mark of his career over the course of 2 seasons. Then on to Monaco for 6 years. This included loans to Manchester United and Chelsea. It was a bit of a weird career for him. Also, of course, plagued by significant injuries. But he still made over 100 appearances for Colombia and played at a World Cup for them. Then there was Fernando Gago, who had just moved to Real Madrid when this database came out. The Argentine would make 92 appearances for Real Madrid, then bounce around Europe for another year before returning to his beloved Boca Juniors, where he played the vast majority of his career. He did have a serious impact on the Argentine national team, where he played 61 matches over the course of a decade, and he now manages in the top flight of Mexico. Speaking of Mexico, Captain Mexico, Andres Guardado, was a top potential guy in 2007. He had just moved to the mighty Deportivo La Coruña in Spain, where he would spend 5 years making 137 appearances. He went through Valencia, Leverkusen, and PSV before landing at Real Betis, where he actually spent 7 more years. He only returned to Mexico last year at the age of 38, and as a result of his longevity, he led Mexico a ridiculous number of times. As a U.S. national team fan, he was enemy number 1. He had 180 appearances for the Mexican national team, and his staying power at the very good level was ridiculous. The same cannot be said for Aaron Niguez, a player that was just getting into the Valencia first team, except he never actually did that. He turned into the lone warrior of all lone warriors. Follow this. Ceres, Heracles, Rangers, Celta Vigo, Recreativo, and then eventually landing at Almeria in 2011, where he had the best 4-year stretch of his career, playing a ton for Almeria and then a ton for Elche over the next 2 years. He found plenty of playing time with Tenerife, Oviedo. He never really broke into the level that Football Manager projected him to be at. But the next guy did. It was Gerard Piqué, who at the time was breaking in at Manchester United, who a lot of people actually forget nowadays he started there. A $5 million move later, he was at Barcelona, and the rest, as they say, was history, until 2022 when he retired. But another fun poll brings back animosity from my childhood. 2007 Wonderkid Giuseppe Rossi, the Italian national team player born in New Jersey. And he wasn't just born there. He went to high school in the United States before going over and getting picked up by Italian academies. This dude was born and raised in the US and made it into the Italian national team. Oh, I was so mad he didn't play for the US, dude. It took him a little while to find his footing in the game, but this rating came out in 2007 when Giuseppe Rossi had landed at Villarreal. And that, weirdly enough, is right when his career picked up. He ended up making 136 appearances for Villarreal, and this is when he got into the Italian national team for the first time. He did go to the 2010 World Cup with Italy, and he made a couple of transfer moves to try and get selected to play for, the 2016 Euros, the 2014 World Cup, and he would always almost make it and then just get cut at the end. His career honestly really faded after his spell with Villarreal, and he was never able to recover his footing. So he never quite reached the heights that allegedly he potentially could have. But he did do better than Argentine goalkeeper Oscar Ustari, who never was able to get over to Europe. I mean, he did. He made an FA Cup appearance for Sunderland as part of a 6-month contract, but he was quickly back into CONCACAF and South America, where he spent the entirety of his career. He is now on the roster of Inter Miami, hanging out with Lionel Messi and the boys. He does have 2 appearances for Argentina, though. It's not like he's had a bad career. He's played for a very long time. He's 39 years old now and still going. But perhaps none was more vexing than Carlos Vela, who, unlike somebody like Ustari, Vela was a starlet in every corner of the game. Everybody thought he was going to be unbelievable. And it just never quite happened. He made the move to Arsenal in 2005, and obviously by Football Manager 2007, they thought that he was on to something. That was after a loan to Salamanca, where he made 31 appearances and it looked like he was turning a corner. He went to Osasuna the year after the game was released and made 33 appearances. He played well. It just never would happen for him at Arsenal. And by 2012, he landed somewhat out of the spotlight at Real Sociedad, where he actually hammered out a very successful 7 seasons. He scored 54 goals and 184 appearances, and then moved to LAFC, where he was consistently listed as one of the best players, if not the best player, in MLS. Which, while it's not a ridiculously high level, he did maintain a high level for a long time. He made 72 appearances for Mexico, including scoring this ridiculous and annoying goal against the United States. And honestly, even though he's considered a bust, his career was more successful than you would think. And that is exactly how I would describe the next guy on this list, Theo Walcott. Yes, he was also given the potential up to 200. And that was when he was getting into the first team with Arsenal. And he looked like a surefire thing. But of course, if you go to his Wikipedia and just type in the word injury, you get 17 different results. That, however, did not stop him from making 270 appearances for Arsenal and nearly 50 appearances for the English national team. This guy played like over 350 times in the Premier League, which is a really successful career, especially when your body is actively conspiring against you. He retired in 2023, and like Carlos Vela, is still remembered as a guy that you feel like could have been much more, even though he was already pretty darn good. But by 2008, Football Manager started to refine the number of people it included on its list. But that refining did not cut out Ever Banega. For Football Manager 2008, he had just made the move from Argentina to Valencia, and he would then basically spend the rest of his career as an important player in La Liga, with the exception of 1 year at Inter. He's still playing. He's at Newell's Old Boys as of 2024, still going strong. But in his heyday from 2008 to 2018, he made 65 appearances for the Argentine national team and was a consistent running mate of one Lionel Messi. He was never in the conversation for World Best 11 or anything like that, but that's a really good career. 2008 also introduced us to Sebastian Giovinco, a player that I know and love from his time in MLS towards the end of his career. And he fits in the kind of Hatem Ben Arfa category. He's one of those guys that if you watched him, you knew he was a really talented and good player. He just couldn't put it together consistently enough to be relied on by the biggest clubs. He technically spent 9 years on the books with Juventus, but that included a couple of loan spells as well, before Toronto FC snapped him up at the ripe old age of 28 in 2015. He attempted to come back to the Italian game in 2022. It didn't really work out after so long away, and obviously he was quite old at that point, so he just kind of retired. Now the next name is another famous Wonderkid name, Bojan. Bojan Krkic, the Spanish Wonderkid. By the time FM 2008 rolled around, he was getting into the Barcelona first team. So he'd seemed like a pretty sure bet, but it never really took off for him. After a couple of years with Barcelona, he couldn't make it stick and moved to Roma. He ended up at AC Milan for a little bit, at Ajax, and then spent 5 years on that magical Arnautovic, Xherdan Shaqiri Stoke City team. And that also included some loan spells. It was never super consistent for him. And by 2019, he was in the US at Montreal Impact. This was not a case of injuries. It just seemed like a case of him not finding the right place to be able to consistently express his talent, would be the way that I would put it. But after him is one of my favorites on this entire list, Lulinha. He was only 17 when this database came out, just getting into the first team at Corinthians, where he would spend 6 years. He was there until 2013. But by 2009, it was clear that he already wasn't a full first team type of guy, and the Brazilians started doing loans everywhere. He went to Portugal a couple of times, then back in Brazil, and then delivered a career trajectory that is just insane. He served basically as a 1-year mercenary over the course of his entire career. He did for 1 year play for Paphos, the Cypriot team that is now in the Champions League, and he's still going. He's playing at Madura United, which, you guessed it, is in the top flight of Indonesia. Gotta shout out his Brazilian U17 record though. He had 16 matches and 16 goals with the Brazil U17s. So I don't blame Football Manager on this one. There was another Brazilian from this group that really hogged the spotlight, and that was Alexander Pato. I remember my friend telling me at one point that they knew who the next Messi was, and it was Alexander Pato. He was the one to watch. He was going to take over the world of football. Of course, injuries saw to that never happening, but he did have a few bright moments with AC Milan over a tenuous 6-year tenure. He then went back to Brazil. He made a brief reappearance in La Liga in 2016, but it didn't stick. In his brief time in the spotlight, he did register 27 appearances and 10 goals for Brazil, but he is a pretty pure case of what could have been. Amazing on his night, but the injuries got to him early and often. And the last one for Football Manager 2008 was Henry Saivet. Breaking into the first team at Bordeaux when Football Manager released the database, he would go on to be a very regular player at Bordeaux over the course of a 9-year career. He then spent 5 years on the books with Newcastle, mainly on loan. Then he returned to French football and has worked his way to Clermont Foot. He's still only 34 years old, and that's where he's playing now. He was a French youth international, but switched it up to Senegal, where he ended up making 31 appearances in his career. But even though he's played a good long while, had a successful career, and played in the top flight for a good long while, it never quite clicked the way Football Manager thought that it would. But it's time to give a shout out to the people that are reappearing in Football Manager 2008. And we start with Anderson. Yes, Anderson did make his second appearance on the list, the guy that was on Manchester United. Giovanni Dos Santos of Barcelona, Barcelona. He was in the middle of his great spell at Barca, so that makes sense. Andres Guardado made his second appearance in 2008. So did Aaron Niguez. Also, so did Oscar Ustari, the goalkeeper from Argentina, and Carlos Vela. But that was it for the repeat offenders, except we had somebody kick off Football Manager 2009 with a third appearance, and that would be Anderson. So was Giovanni Dos Santos and Carlos Vela. All three of those guys rose up to the very top tier with 3 consecutive appearances. And there were 3 guys that made it for their second time too. Alexander Pato, of course, was on it for a second time in this year, 2009. But so was Boyan. And also there was Henri Savet. But to the new guys, Mario Balotelli. You're damn right, we finally made it to Mario Balotelli. You knew he had to be on here somewhere. The incredibly polarizing and obviously mercurial striker had one of the highest peaks of anybody in the last 20 years. But it was brief. He only made 36 appearances for Italy, but you can make a compelling argument the majority of the time that he was with the team, he was the best player there. His attitude didn't mesh well with the direct spotlight, but he's actually managed to make his career last a good long while a bit outside of it. He spent a couple productive years at Nice rebuilding himself after his Inter and Manchester City days, and then he's just bounced between opportunities, whatever catches his fancy and interests him, because that has always been the only reason that he would play. But I don't know how Football Manager would ever predict that. Balotelli was clearly one of the most talented players of the last 20 years. The same could not be said for his fellow Italian Vincenzo Fiorillo, a goalkeeper who never got to the Italian national team. When the 09 database came out, he was a youngster just getting into the Sampdoria team as a teenager, but he didn't become a first-team goalkeeper before catching a loan to Pescara in 2014. That was when he was on the books at Juventus, and then he spent a very productive 7 years at Pescara being their #1 goalkeeper. He's now just riding out the rest of his career as a backup, but who knows what could have been. Clearly, Football Manager thought it could have been better. They thought the same for Martin Galvan, a Mexican winger who was breaking through at Cruz Azul when this rating was bestowed upon him. Galvan just never elevated. He just stayed at that level and has plied his trade in Mexico dutifully for a long time. He finally jumped to Europe in 2017 and played a few years at Salamanca in Spain, never really being a regular player. Galvan just didn't end up being that good. And he was given the same potential ability as this guy, Toni Kroos. He was pretty good. You spend your whole career in the first teams of Bayern Munich and Real Madrid and then retire on top. Something's going right for you. That was definitely an acceptable poll. A little more divisive one is the next one. Another midfielder, Miralem Pjanic. Pjanic was a top-rated potential player in FM 2009. So Bosnia and Herzegovina's got a guy on this list. Who do you have? To the credit of this rating, Pjanic did spend more than a decade at the very top level of the game, with Roma and then Juventus, and of course playing very regularly for Bosnia and Herzegovina, including a World Cup appearance. He's aged gracefully through the ranks of Barcelona and Besiktas, and is currently a free agent, potentially looking to give it one more go somewhere. And the final Wonderkid from FM 2009 is a vintage Wonderkid, Mamadou Sakho. This dude was just getting going with the PSG first team when this database came out and looked like a surefire bet. And to be honest, he did have a good career, even though he was kind of memeable and never a super top level defender. He made 151 appearances for PSG, then went to Liverpool for what was an up and down 4-year stint, then spent 4 years at Crystal Palace, staying at the Premier League level, before moving on back to France. He was good enough to get the call-ups to France though. He had 29 appearances for the French national team. He was just never a defender from my perspective that you looked at and figured he was going to be able to completely shut down the opposition. He sustained at a world-class level for a while, but he wasn't somebody that separated them. And that brings us to Football Manager 2010. This is part of the transition. It's the last year on this list that has more than 3 people on it. So you can imagine we're about to move a lot faster. And there are a couple of repeats. Mario Balotelli, play the hits. He's there for a second straight year. So is the Mexican Martin Galvan, and also Toni Kroos. But there were 3 new names, including goalkeeper Alphonse Areola, a name that might be familiar to you because he was part of West Ham's European trophy. At the time Football Manager 2010 came out, he was a 17-year-old goalkeeper starting to get time at PSG, and so he got christened with the top level rating. The problem is when I say PSG, I actually mean PSG B. He didn't break into the PSG first team until 2013, and he spent a lot of that time out on loan, which is a tough way to live. Spells with Lens, Bastia, Villarreal, a backup stint with Real Madrid. Then he got a taste for England, Fulham, and then West Ham. He is still currently at West Ham United in his career. But given where it looked like he was going to be, Football Manager took a huge swing on him when he was still years away from first team appearances with PSG, giving him this rating, and he's ended up with only 5 appearances for France and never really being able to become the full first team option at a team he wasn't loaned out to for that purpose. But he has had his moments at West Ham, and that is very valuable to some. There was also Nicolas Otamendi. The undersized center back was still so highly touted he got the top rating in Football Manager, and it was right when he had made his move to Porto. Very common theme, obviously. These players make their moves to bigger clubs, and that's when they get this potential ability rating. And it obviously worked. Otamendi has been an unbelievably important part of an Argentine national team that kind of won the last World Cup and a Copa America. At the club level, he spent 5 years as an important part of an incredibly good Manchester City team. Since then, he's been plying his trade at Benfica, where he still is now. But that is a hit. Which brings us to one of the more divisive names we're going to come across, Eduardo Salvia. Eduardo had just moved to Atletico Madrid from Argentina, and he would make 44 appearances for them over the course of kind of a year and a half. But his career really took off at Benfica, where he spent 7 years as a valued player in Portugal. He then returned to the New World, where he's been plying his trade ever since. It's a good career. It just didn't find a home at the top level of the game on the club side. He did make 14 appearances for Argentina, though, and that led up to fairly recently. He was on the 2018 World Cup team and played a couple of matches in Russia. And that's it for 2010. On to 2011, where there's only 2 players total. And one is our old friend Alphonse Areola, who still had not made a first-team appearance for the club. That's how highly regarded he was. The other player was Aaron Ramsey. He was, as somebody in the comments of this post said, Wales' Jude Bellingham. He got this rating at the age of 21 while he was already on the roster at Arsenal. And even though a good number of the years he was at Arsenal were perhaps not the best years, he did make 262 appearances for the club and was a very important part of the Welsh national team that managed to scrap its way into an incredible Euros run and then a World Cup appearance, which was unthinkable when his career really started out. From 2008 to 2022, he spent the vast majority of his time playing at the top levels of the game, wrapping things up with Juventus there, and then working his way down the leagues until he's ended up in Mexico. Aaron Ramsey was a key part of Wales' golden generation and had himself a great career. But the question is, did he deserve to be on the list again in 2012? Because Aaron Ramsey was actually there 2 times. But how about this? In Football Manager 2013, that's right, there was only 1 name on the list in 2012, there was no one. For the first time ever, nobody earned the top rating. But that changed the next year. In 2014, we had 3, starting with Eder Balanta, the Colombian Wonderkid, who was just getting going at River Plate in Argentina. He stayed there till 2016, then moved over to Europe with Basel and had himself a good career with Basel and Club Brugge. But that's not the level that you're aiming for when Football Manager thinks you can arguably be the best player in the world. Now he's back in Colombia playing with America de Cali in his early 30s. He has made 9 appearances for Colombia, but honestly, he never really reached that super top level. He actually only left Bruges last year, so he is a part of the rise of Club Brugge that we've seen in Europe. But the other 2 polls from Football Manager were definite hits. First was Marquinhos in 2014. He had just landed with PSG, where he literally still is at over 300 appearances for the club. The Brazilian center back also has over 100 caps for arguably the most competitive national team in the world. He is the steadiest hand of steady hands. And the third guy, while maybe not a steady hand, is undoubtedly one of the best players of the last 20 years, Paul Pogba. When he's able to avoid his own family's witchcraft and wizardry, he is a fantastic player. He obviously has a World Cup title, over 90 appearances for the French national team, and over a decade spent at the top level of the game. Like, the very top level of the game. Juventus and Manchester United. But none of those guys would repeat in 2015, as their potential was refined. But FM 2015 did have one Wonderkid that reached the threshold. Bit of a surprising name if you didn't play the game. Yuri Tielemans. The Belgian midfielder was making headway at Anderlecht and became a very regular player there, but he didn't leave until 2017, 2 years after this database came out, and then he just went to Monaco. He's in fact never played for what you would consider a huge club. He spent 4 years at Leicester, now he's at Aston Villa, and it's a very good career. He's making a lot of appearances for all of these clubs. He's not getting lost in the bench or anything. He just hasn't ascended. You know? 79 appearances for Belgium's not bad, though. He is a key part of one of the best national teams in the world. In 2016, there were once again no players on the list, but we were saved in 2017 when Football Manager gave the rating to one player, Gianluigi Donnarumma. A seemingly ageless goalkeeper that just spawned in at the age of 16 is one of the best goalkeepers in the world. He was already making a lot of headway at AC Milan before eventually moving to PSG, which obviously culminated in a Champions League title for him, and now, in case you haven't noticed, he's on Manchester City. But yeah, he ended up being pretty good, and is often considered in the conversation for one of the best goalkeepers in the world, even though he hasn't really nailed that spot down. He's struggled with bouts of inconsistency at times. The following year in FM 2018, the first year that I started streaming Football Manager, which if you ever want to watch me play FM, the game's obviously going to come out soon. My Twitch is down in the description. I'll see you there live. I look even better live. You know what I'm saying? In 2018, Donnarumma made it for a second time, and he was joined by Kylian Mbappe. Duh. 2018 was when Mbappe was making his move to PSG from Monaco. He was going from loan there to transfer there. And of course, 2018 is when Kylian Mbappe became one of the best international players anybody's ever seen, inspiring France to a World Cup title. Everything else from there has been gravy, and basically since this database came out, he's been one of the best players in the world. Definite hit. And it had to be, because Football Manager was getting more and more selective. In 2019 and 2020, there were 0 top-level potential players in the entire database. And the only guy to change that in 2021 was Eduardo Camavinga. The Angolan-born French international burst onto the scene as an incredibly versatile, incredibly talented player at Stade Rennais, where he had already played a full season as a first-team player when this database came out. And when the database came out, he was still just 17 years old. He moved to Real Madrid in 2021. It took him a little while to get going, and he still hasn't fully nailed down that undisputed spot in the Real Madrid lineup, often used as a versatile substitute, obviously with his ability to cover a lot of positions, but he's a regular in the French national team, is clearly immensely talented, and I wouldn't be surprised if he stayed at Real Madrid for a very long time. But he just needs to take that little final half step to being looked at as a world best 11 type guy. In 2022, Football Manager finally got frisky again. Not only did they put Eduardo Camavinga back on the list, for the second straight year, they added 2 new players. Ilaix Moriba was the first one, a downright fascinating player who came up at Barcelona as an unbelievable do-it-all midfielder. But then in a strange situation where he was demanding a ton of money and Barcelona didn't want to pay it, so he ended up at RB Leipzig. All went down. RB Leipzig decided to pay him his huge contract that he wanted. And it hasn't quite worked out, because he's only made 2 appearances for RB Leipzig. Now, that's unfair because he's played a lot on loan, played a lot with Valencia over the course of 2 years, played a full season with Celta Vigo last year, and has now joined Celta Vigo for this season. On the bright side, he's still only 22 years old, so there's plenty of time for him to land at a club like Celta Vigo, build himself up, and find himself at the very top of the game. But it's clear that the swing on the big contract at such a young age was maybe a bad idea, at least for his development. I'm sure his wallet's great. And he plays for the Guinean national team, meaning Guinea, despite not having a World Cup appearance, does have a player on this list. He's made 25 appearances for his home country. The other player FM added in 2022, Youssoufa Moukoko. Now, I saw this guy coming. He was like an out-of-control freight train, scoring 1 billion goals a year in every youth division in Germany before he was finally legally allowed to appear in the Bundesliga. But from the moment he appeared in the Bundesliga, it just never quite took off. He spent 5 years on the tape at Borussia Dortmund, 4 of those years trying to get it to click, but he could never take the step past exciting kind of super sub into reliable regular. Alone at Nice last year didn't really change that, and now he's moved to Copenhagen to try and rejuvenate his career. So both him and Ilaix Moriba kind of look like misses right now, but they still have a chance to turn it around. Moukoko did make a couple of appearances for the German national team, but it looked like an obvious play to make sure he stayed German because he was born in Cameroon. Unsurprisingly, none of the 3 guys that were on the list in 2022 made it in 2023. Instead, it was a player who immediately took over all the headlines, Endrick. He was the only one to get the top rating, and the jury is still out. He is an obviously rugged, explosive player. In some ways very Brazilian, and in some ways not, at least in terms of his play style. He has broken into the Brazilian national team and moved to Real Madrid, where there are promises of more playing time coming his way in the future. But given the guy that he's compared to, he hasn't done that well yet. He's still 19 years old though, so everybody chill. The only issue for Endrick really is that now we have arrived at the most recent game, Football Manager 2024, and it did have one player. And the one player is, of course, Lamine Yamal, who, at just 18 years of age, outside of throwing the most talked about birthday party of the century, it seems, has already made 77 appearances for Barcelona, 23 appearances for the Spanish national team, won the Euros, the league. He's 18. He finished second in the Ballon d'Or voting. This is like the most slam dunk 170 to 200 rating that Football Manager may have ever given. They did hit Lionel Messi with it. You notice they never hit Ronaldo with it? It's a weird list. I mean, so many things have to come together for you to get the top rating. You need to have your timing just right in your breakout, the scouts see just the right things, and a little bit of luck going your way in the final debate room at Football Manager to determine what your potential ability is going to be. But even though there's a lot of misses, a who's who of some of the players that have come through the top ranks over the years have received this rating. Let me know your favorite one in the biggest bust down in the comments. I'm very excited to read all of those, and I'll see you on stream.